You have been told that naming your pain is the first step toward healing it, but what if the very words you are using to describe your mind are actually redesigning your neural pathways for permanent distress? We are living in an era where everyone is an amateur clinician, yet despite having more psychological terminology at our fingertips than any generation in history, our collective mental well-being is in a state of freefall. The human brain is an incredible engine of adaptation, but it is also a victim of the labels we feed it. When you take a complex fluid human emotion and crystallize it into a clinical diagnosis, you aren't just describing a state of being, you are often building a cage. Today, we are going to dismantle the illusion of therapy speak and uncover how the misuse of psychological jargon is preventing the very resilience you are trying to build. In Greek mythology, Narcissus did not simply love himself, he became paralyzed by his own reflection, unable to look away until he withered away by the water's edge. Modern therapy speak has created a digital pool of Narcissus for the 21st century. By constantly checking in with ourselves and analyzing every interaction through the lens of trauma, boundaries, and triggers, we have turned our internal gaze inward so sharply that we have lost our peripheral vision for the world around us. This hyperfixation on the self creates a psychological feedback loop where the brain begins to hunt for pathology. If you spend your day scanning your environment for red flags or gaslighting, your amygdala remains in a state of high alert. You are essentially training your nervous system to stay in a sympathetic state, searching for threats in your social circles that may not even exist. This constant self-surveillance doesn't lead to enlightenment, it leads to a fragmented social life and a brain that is just too exhausted by analysis to actually experience joy. The danger of the current trend lies in the dilution of clinical terms into everyday slang. When we use the word trauma to describe a difficult breakup or PTSD to describe a stressful day at the office, we are engaging in semantic creep. From a neurological perspective, words matter because they frame our appraisal of stress. If you label a standard life challenge as a trauma, your brain treats it as an existential threat. This triggers a massive cortisol release that would not occur if you simply viewed the event as difficult or unpleasant. By medicalizing our normal emotional spectrum, we strip ourselves of the psychological immune system that humans have relied on for millennia. We are essentially teaching our brains that we are fragile and broken by default, rather than resilient and adaptable. So, this shift in identity from being an active participant in life to, seeing ourselves as a victim of symptoms, actually changes the way the prefrontal cortex handles problem solving. It makes us, a lot less likely to take the necessary actions to change our circumstances. We've really been conditioned to believe that setting boundaries is like the ultimate act of self-care, but honestly, the way therapy speak often applies this idea ends up looking a lot more like emotional isolation. True boundaries, though, are meant to protect relationships, not to act as a weaponized no that just prevents any form of discomfort. When you use clinical language to shut down a partner or friend, maybe saying they're violating your space or draining your energy, you're often, without realizing it, bypassing the messy but really essential work of interpersonal negotiation. The brain really thrives on social cohesion and, the ability to navigate conflict, but when you use therapy speak as a shield, you actually atrophy the parts of your brain responsible for empathy and social nuance. What happens next is that you start to see people as toxic assets to be managed or discarded, instead of, complex humans to be understood. This ends up creating a lonely architecture in the mind, where the lack of deep, challenging connection leads to a decrease in oxytocin and, honestly, an increase in the very anxiety you were trying to avoid. So, to reclaim your mental health, you really have to implement a protocol of linguistic fasting, and, just to be clear, this isn't about ignoring your feelings, but about describing them with what we might call low-stakes language. The protocol requires that for the next 30 days, you remove clinical diagnostic terms from your daily vocabulary unless you are in a session with a licensed professional. When you feel a surge of emotion, instead of saying "I am triggered," say "I am feeling uncomfortable." And, Instead of saying, "That person is toxic," say, "I don't like how I feel when I am around them." This subtle shift moves the locus of control back to you. It transitions the brain from a passive, reactive state to an active, observant state. You are no longer a victim of a clinical phenomenon, you are an individual experiencing a temporary sensation. This practice lowers the effective charge of your thoughts, allowing your parasympathetic nervous system to engage more quickly after a stressful event. The second step in this cognitive realignment is the externalization habit. Research suggests that people who focus on external goals and the well-being of others have significantly lower rates of rumination-based depression. For 2 hours every afternoon, the time when the midday slump often leads to overanalysis, you must engage in a task that is entirely self-blind. This means a task where your own feelings and identity are irrelevant to the outcome, such as, say, a complex hobby, a physical workout, or maybe helping a colleague. By forcing the brain to look outward, you break the narcissus loop. Basically, you are teaching your brain that it is a tool for interacting with the world, not just a laboratory for studying its own defects. This dosage of 2 hours of external focus acts as a reset for the default mode network, which is the part of the brain that becomes overactive during periods of excessive self-referential thought. Instead of building a vocabulary of pathology, we must build a vocabulary of agency. This involves the cognitive step of reframing through effort. When you encounter a hardship, your brain's first instinct under the influence of therapy speak might be to ask, "How is this affecting my mental health?" You must override this. The new protocol is to ask, "What resource do I have to meet this challenge?" This shifts the neural processing from the limbic system to the prefrontal cortex. It moves you from a state of emotional fragility to a state of anti-fragility. In this framework, stress isn't something that destroys you, it's actually the resistance that makes your psychological muscles stronger. You begin to see your mind not as a delicate vase that might crack at any moment, but as a high-performance engine that, requires regular testing to stay in peak condition. The breakthrough you are looking for won't be found in a new diagnosis or a trendier piece of jargon. It's found in the silence that exists when you stop over-explaining your existence. Mental health is not the absence of struggle, and it's definitely not the ability to perfectly categorize your pain. It is the ability to live a life of meaning despite the inherent chaos of being human. By stripping away the layers of therapy speak, you reveal the raw, capable, and resilient version of yourself that has been buried under a mountain of clinical labels. You are not a collection of symptoms, you are a force of nature designed to adapt and overcome. If this deep dive into the hidden mechanics of your mind has changed the way you view your internal dialogue, then you are ready for the next level of psychological mastery. We are dedicated to bringing you the science-backed truths that the mainstream narrative often misses. Subscribe now to continue mapping your brain for success and resilience. Share this brain map with one person in your life who has been stuck in the cycle of over-analysis. Together, we can move past the labels and get back to the actual work of living.